to you. I think we started about a minute late or so, trying to get some graphics together for a cup of cyber. It is that kind of morning. We're just at the last minute scrambling around to get things done. It's just the way it goes. I think volume's a little high. Let me bring volume down a piece. So we do have the pirate flag hoisted in the back, kind of a remnant to where we started and where we'll we'll eventually go back to. So the pirate flag obviously signifies it's Wednesday. Normally on Wednesday, we talk about a threat, attack, a vulnerability, something's going on in the wild. But since we're in this rush for Security Plus, we are still driving on with Security Plus. Maybe we should have switched yesterday and today around. Maybe we'd have had vulnerability scanning yesterday and penetration testing today. That would have made some good sense. That's the way it is. So today we are celebrating, of course. Our day is National School Nurse Day. It's also Revenge of the 6th, which follows, May the 4th. That May the 4th be with you. Revenge of the 6th is Revenge of the 6th, kind of a play on those words. But it is actually National School Nurse Day, and I know a lot of school nurses probably aren't at school right now, but they'll eventually be back, and they'll be back doing their good work at school. So that's one thing. Second thing, of course, trivia night coming up Friday. Second trivia night. Gonna keep going. It's gonna be fun. Love to see some people out there. Come out and sign on. Easy sign on. We don't ask for any personal information. The sign on is really simple. 2 steps. You throw our room name into the engine, and then you throw the name you want to use. Again, don't throw any profanity in there, nothing derogatory. We don't want any of that. But throw your name there. It can be whatever you want. It's nothing we're going to track you by. You don't have to provide an email or anything like that. And it's just going to be fun. We'll go out and we'll do a live stream. We'll ask the questions. We'll see who comes out on top with the best security knowledge this week. Friday night. Got weird shadows there. Friday night, East Coast time, 7 p.m. That's when we're going to get rolling. You'll be able to log in about 6:45, about 15 minutes prior to us going live to the live stream. You'll be able to log on. So log on, check it out, make sure your credentials are set up. And by credentials, your name. We'd love to see who can come out. Maybe, dethrone the current champion, I guess. Come out, show us your security chops. We'd love to see it. But on to the day. So today we're going to be talking about vulnerability scanning concepts. This is still part of Domain 1. And again, we talked about Domain 1 in Security Plus. It is pretty big. I would say it's huge, but it's pretty big. It covered about a quarter of the test material is on Domain 1. So we're going to want to, take care of Domain 1. We're going to, do the right thing with it and make sure things that are going on. So this is 1.5. This is vulnerability scanning concepts, and we'll be right back with it in just a couple seconds here. So let's switch over to that, and we'll do our little intro, and we'll be right back. All right, let's get our normal background. Let's get the server room back here. Bang, now it's server room again. Actually, we weren't using the server room. We were using the desktop. There we go. Cyber-Recon desktop back. Let's get into what we're talking about today. So today, we're driving on Cyber-Recon. We're driving on with Security Plus preparation, talking about Domain 1, compare and contrast types of attacks. And we're talking about subdomain 1.5, which is vulnerability scanning concepts. There's something you're going to need to know for the exam, for the certification exam. Something you need to know for your general security knowledge. So hit the bell, whichever way it's at. Hit the bell. Let us know you want to hear new content. Throw some comments down below. We'd love to hear what you think about vulnerability scanning. Do you do vulnerability scanning? Is it effective? What do you think the problems are? Do you have a favorite tool you use? I know a lot of people are using Qualys nowadays. A lot of people use Nessus in the past. iRetina had a good scanner. There's a ton of open source stuff out there too. What are you using for vulnerability scanning, and do you think it's effective? What are the high points and the low points of your security scanning environment? Throw those in the comments below. We'd love to hear about it. Like, subscribe, and share with your friends, of course. But let's jump into the slide deck and talking about this subdomain 1.5 vulnerability scanning concepts and how you can use this knowledge to prepare for your exam. So, first off, well, what is a vulnerability scanner? It's important to know what this is before we understand vulnerability scanning concept. So it's an automated tool that evaluates the vulnerabilities in a system. And these vulnerabilities can include missing patches, misconfiguration, or poor design of the system itself. So we're going to use a tool normally. We could potentially do vulnerability scanning manually, which would be very arduous, very time intensive, because we'd have to go in and evaluate each setting on the system, and we'd have to evaluate each patch that is in place and evaluate against the configuration that it should be and the patches that should be applied. So it can be done manually, but it would take a ton of time, and you wouldn't be able to do an environment. So we have to really use a tool to do this. NIST says vulnerability scanning is a technique used to identify hosts or host attributes and associated vulnerabilities. So we're looking for things that will make the information system that we're working with vulnerable. And with those vulnerabilities, things we have to look out for. We have to make sure that if we identify them, we can correct them either by patching the vulnerability or changing the configuration or applying mitigating controls. So first thing we need to know is passively testing security controls. This means there is no intent to exploit the system. Like we did with the penetration test, we found the vulnerability, and then we also took it a step further. We exploited the vulnerability to prove that the system was vulnerable to that attack or that vulnerability. It could be exploited, and the system could be compromised, right? We're just passively evaluating the patches and the configuration of the system. We're going in essentially like an end user or as an administrator would be, because you really can't do this as an end user, and we'll see that in a little bit, that you have to have credentials. So we're going in and we're checking the file system. We're checking to see if a patch has been applied. We're checking to see what the configuration of the system is. And when I say configuration of the system, I mean, what is the password requirements? What's the length of the password, right? So there's going to be a policy, there's going to be a control that says a password needs to be X number of characters long. Maybe that's 8. So we go in and we check the system and we say, is the password required to be 8 characters long? That's a control. If it's not configured that way, if the system is not configured that way, that's a misconfiguration. If it's configured for 6 characters or there's no password length requirement, that's a misconfiguration. So we have to fix that, because it could be possible for someone to set a weaker password, right? If the system protects the vulnerability from being discovered, it has the possibility of not being exploitable. So if we have a vulnerability on the system, but during the vulnerability scans we can't get to that vulnerability, there is a chance that that vulnerability may not exist, right? So it may not be a risk, I should say. The vulnerability is going to exist, but the risk may not exist. So to have a risk, we have to have a vulnerability and a threat source or a threat actor or a threat that will exploit that vulnerability. That makes a risk. So if we have a vulnerability that we can't even discover, that we can't get to, then there's the possibility, and it's just a possibility, that the system can't be exploitable. And that normally means that that's just for today. We have to keep a pulse on that. We have to make sure that over time that doesn't change. So we have to also identify the vulnerability, and this is what the scanner is really good at. But we have to remember that vulnerabilities are known entities. The scanner can't look for vulnerabilities that aren't identified. And what I mean is, We talked about 0 days, and 0 days are vulnerabilities that only the attacker that discovered the 0 day or the researcher that discovered the 0 day know about. So if the vulnerability scanner doesn't know about a vulnerability, it can't check for it. So it only looks for things that are in its catalog. So essentially it's going to say, I'm going to check a configuration, and that's what the scanner is going to say. I'm going to check the configuration. Is the password 8 characters? If the password is 8 characters, then it can check and say that's good. I'm going to look as the scanner in a certain file to see if a patch has been applied. If that patch has been applied, then I know it's good. But 0 days and things like that, the system doesn't know about. The scanner doesn't know about 0 days, so it can't check for a 0 day. So a lot of vulnerabilities are cataloged in a number of places. 2 good places that I always use is the National Vulnerability Database from NIST, and you know how I feel about NIST. I always love their definitions. That's nvd.nist.gov, and the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposure, or CVEs, at cve.miter.gov. Great places to go look at these things, check them out, just keep on top of things. Identified vulnerabilities, once they're identified by the scanner, they're included in the report. So they'll be in the report. You can check the report. You can see what all of your systems are vulnerable to. That includes, again, misconfigurations and missing patches are the biggest things. Vulnerability scanning is part of an organization's patch management program normally. The vulnerability scanning identifies missing patches, and then the patch management program goes out and fixes those missing patches, and then it's turned back over to vulnerability scanning to rescan and make sure the patches were applied. So we're looking also for the lack of security controls. Scanner conducts the evaluation of the information system. Vulnerabilities are identified, of course, and noted in the report. Vulnerabilities themselves are weaknesses in the information system, security procedures, internal controls, or implementation that could be exploited or triggered by a threat source, kind of what we talked about before. But that's the NIST definition. So lack of security controls. If we don't have those security controls in place, or if they're weak, the scanner is going to let us know about it. So if they're, like I said, if we go back to that control around password length, if there is no required password length, that's a missing control. We need to get that control applied, and normally that's applied through some type of automated mechanism through Active Directory or the local security procedure or PAM in the Linux machine. A lot of different ways we can do it, but that's the point. We identify that it's there, and then we can go fix it. Common misconfigurations. Again, a misconfiguration can be a control. It can also be that the system is poorly designed. And we see this a lot with applications. So if we have a web application, maybe that doesn't do input data validation, like we have a place where the user can put their name and we can allow them to put any strings of data in there that could cause a buffer overflow, or could cause cross-site scripting, or could cause a SQL injection, or any of the things we talked about. Probably throw them up there, bang, bang, bang. Link to those different things. We want to make sure that the system is protected for those. So our scanner can look for these misconfigurations. So according to NIST, an incorrect or suboptimal configuration of an information system or a system component that may lead to vulnerabilities. So we're going to look for misconfigurations too. So we're going to look for making sure controls are in place. We're going to make sure that the system is configured correctly. We're going to make sure that the patches are applied. All these things are going to happen with a vulnerability scanner. And you can see why these tools are so effective. The scanner can do what's called intrusive and non-intrusive tests. So on the intrusive side, the scanner interacts with the system and can cause unwanted effects. This could be rebooting of the system, crashing of the system, or the system being unavailable. A lot of times we go in, we set up our scanner, it's going to have a checkbox that's going to say conduct intrusive scans. And there are times we want to do these, right? So some of this intrusive scanning can be things like conduct denial of service attacks, right? So the scanner can do a check to see if the system is vulnerable to a denial of service attacks. This could cause the system to crash. But when we're doing a denial of service attack, we're doing the same thing that the attacker would do, essentially. We're running those types of checks against the system to see if it's vulnerable. So sometimes we have to do that. If we have a system that has high availability, and if we remember back to our CIA triad, if we have high availability in our system, that means it's got to be able to withstand a denial of service attack. And the only way to prove that is to check for it. So we may do that through a penetration test. We may do that through vulnerability scanning. But know that intrusive scans can cause these unwanted side effects. Non-intrusive scans are potentially less damaging. I'm saying potentially because there's always potential that something could go wrong in the scan. There's always potential that something could happen on the system. And it could even be that something happens on the system that has nothing to do with the scan, but happens around the same time. And I guarantee that the system owner or the IT folks will say it was the scanner that caused the problem with the system, even if it wasn't. So be careful when we're doing scanning. Make sure we get permission, make sure we set it up, make sure we notify all the right people, make sure we have our kind of logging on so that we keep track of what we're scanning, when we're scanning, what's going on. But non-intrusive scans do things like version checking, file checking, and configuration checking. We can do all of those things without being intrusive. We can go and check the file system and see if a patch is in place. We can check the version to see if the correct version of software is installed on the system. Those kind of things we can do with non-intrusive scans. Another big thing is credentialed and non-credentialed. Is the scan being conducted with full access to the system? A lot of times we're going to have to check on a Windows system things like the system registry. We're going to have to go in the registry, and if you don't have credentials, you're not going to be able to get in the registry. You're not going to be able to see if all of the patches are applied. So this is giving the scanner, we put into the scanner legitimate credentials, right? So that could be username and password. That could be a cryptographic key that allows the scanning to take place. Credentialed scans are more effective. You're not going to find out what all is going on with the system with a non-credentialed scan. In a non-credentialed scan, the scanner does not have any type of credentials to log fully onto the system. This is less effective, but there are reasons we'd want to do a non-credentialed scan. So if we want to see what maybe an attacker would see should they get onto the network and be able to conduct a scan, maybe we want to do a non-credentialed scan, and we'll see what the attacker would see initially. And this would be before they obviously elevate their access. So there's reasons for them. Your credentialed scan is going to be your most effective scan. If you're doing vulnerability scanning as part of a patch management program or part of the vulnerability identification program, you're going to want to use credentialed scans. But you have in your toolbox the ability to do non-credentialed scan. And it's important if you're working in this field, it's important to be able to look at a report and be able to tell, was this done with a credentialed scan or was this done with a non-credentialed scan? Because when you're evaluating a system, a lot of times the system owners will give you a report that's done with a non-credentialed scan because the system will look cleaner, it'll look like it's more secure, even though it may not be, because again, without credentials, you can't do a lot of these checks. Last thing you really need to know about vulnerability scanning is this thing called false positives. And we'll also throw in false negatives so you know those, but the false positive is really the thing we have to hammer on. And from NIST, this says this is an alert that I'll try that one more time. So NIST says this is an alert that incorrectly indicates a vulnerability is present. So essentially the scanner is making a mistake determining the system has a specific vulnerability, but it doesn't. And this is particularly we've seen this a lot. Particularly, we've seen this a lot in Windows systems, where Windows will release a patch, and then later they'll release a roll-up of patches that includes a number of patches. And when the system owner applies that roll-up, then it also includes that patch. So if the scanner is configured to look only for the patch and not the roll-up, then the scanner will report that that system is vulnerable because that patch is missing. But really it was applied in a roll-up, so it's showing up differently in the system. Also, we can say sometimes the scanner will find a vulnerability that exists in an older version of software, but you're using a newer version of the software. So there's some checking as the person that's conducting the vulnerability scan. You're going to have to look at your report, and you're going to have to check those vulnerabilities to make sure that they're all true vulnerabilities, not these false positives. So again, a false positive is a finding that the scanner has that is not really a vulnerability. So it's found something, it's detected something, but that's not really a vulnerability. Now, the book doesn't talk, or the test plan for Security Plus doesn't talk about false negatives, but false negative is when a vulnerability does exist, but the scanner doesn't pick it up. So know those two. You definitely need to know false positive, and it's probably something some of you will see on your exam, because it's a big point. It's something's identified as a vulnerability, but it's not really a vulnerability. And there's a number of reasons that happens. You need to be able to go in as the vulnerability expert and identify those things and identify them as false positives. Now, false negative, know this too, that it's a vulnerability that exists on the system, but your scanner did not detect it. So that's the rundown. That's what you need to know about vulnerability scanners, their concepts, the main points about them. What you need to know is the basic of your security career, what you need to know for the Security Plus examination, and getting you ready to kick in your security career into high gear and get you out there. I'm Jim with Cyber-Recon. As always, be safe, be careful out there. Hit the bell to be notified. It's over there, I think. It's down there. Comment. Let me know what you think's going on. Is it good, bad? Are you going to make trivia night? Are you going to make trivia night this week? Are you going to come out on top on trivia night? Throw that in the comment below. I'd like to see who has the chops to just claim it down below. They're going to be the champ this week. Tell your friends. Bring them out there. Let them know they can become the top of the trivia food chain for security. Again, we're talking about vulnerabilities and attacks this week, so we'll be jumping into some questions like, tell me about buffer overflow, maybe, or maybe it's going to be about, can you identify some people that did some of these types of attacks? Can you know who they look like? And we'll also got a round where we're going to check you on your ability to identify some acronyms. So come out. We'll see you. And be careful out there. We'll talk to you next time.